Jess Campbell, who is the owner and principal at Out in the Boons. Welcome to the show, Jess.
Jenni, it's so much fun to be here with you to talk all things fundraising today.
Yeah, and Jess and I have been friends for a while, so I'm so glad that you're finally on the podcast, Jess. It's going to be fun. Today, we're talking about 5 ways that nonprofit leaders can find new donors. But first, can you tell me a little bit about what you do at Out in the Boons?
Sure thing. So, in a nutshell, I teach nonprofits how to raise more money in person and online. Simple,
Great.
easy
So
peasy.
this is the perfect topic for you today then. Can you tell me just real quickly, we'll talk about each of the 5 ways to find new donors more in depth, but can you just give me a brief overview? What are the 5 things you're going to talk to me about?
Sure thing. So, we're first going to talk about looking inside your current community. We're going to talk about something I refer to as the inside out method. We're then going to talk about something I like to call making the first move. And then we're going to talk about planting seeds. And then for our 5th and final thing we're going to talk about is building a Dream 100 list.
Amazing. Oh, I can't wait for that one. Well, so let's start with number 1, which I believe you said is looking into your community, right?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Totally. So if you're a nonprofit listening, you probably have heard from a nonprofit coach or consultant like me that it is way more effective and time efficient to look into your current community or to upgrade a current donor than it is to go find a new one, right? And so I am on board and on the same page with my fellow nonprofit coach and consultants, because it's true. If someone has already raised their hand, if someone's already following you on social media or on your email list, it's easier to go to them first versus go build a totally fresh new relationship from scratch. So some ways you can find new donors is to find people who are already in your community but haven't yet given. Can you put them through an email sequence? Can you send them a DM on Instagram? Can you facilitate some sort of lunch and learn that's special and unique for them and invite them and start building that relationship? I always recommend starting in that place first.
Yeah, one thing I talk about with listeners and with my clients too is within your own community, one of your strongest group of supporters can be your volunteers, right? But I hear from a lot of nonprofit leaders, they kind of push back a little bit and they'll say, well, we don't want to alienate volunteers. They're already giving so much of their time. We don't want to go and beg them for money. So what would you say to that?
I would say that your volunteers are already showing up as some of your most engaged champions. And in my experience, if I am willing to give someone my time, which is it's the one resource we're never going to get more of. If I'm showing up with my time, it's almost obvious that they would double down with a donation, which takes 2 seconds of their time. And so I think rather than being concerned about asking for too much, you should go to people who have already raised their hand. They already are saying, I care about you, I appreciate you, I support what you do, and I'm showing you with my most valuable asset, which is time. And then going from there and asking for a donation. Now you like with every donor need to be conscious and you need to do your research on the amount you are asking for, because that's part of the donor prospecting process. Not every volunteer is going to be your largest donor, but just like I teach my clients around your most engaged donor audience, if someone is giving to you by mail and email, it's the same with your volunteers. If someone is giving you their time and their money, they're showing you that they're rising themselves to the top to say that they are your biggest champions.
Yeah, I think too, volunteers often get the best seat in the house to see your impact on the front lines of what your organization is doing. And so if anyone's going to be passionate about your mission, it's those people who are actively engaging in the mission. And so they know exactly where their dollars are going to go.
Mm-hmm. And they have some of the best stories because they have I statements. They have the ability to say, when I was filling up the pantry, or when I was helping someone recraft their resume, or when I was teaching that composting class, that just sounds a way totally different than someone who's saying, oh, well, when I talked to my program director about this and they told me a story about that. And so it's just really powerful. So I agree. I think that your volunteers are probably some of your your best assets to go to.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about number one, which was looking to your community to get new donors. What's the second way that nonprofits can find new donors?
Yes. So I call it the inside out method. And if you think of this like the core of the earth or the core of an apple, the inside, the closest bit to the center are probably your board of directors. And then maybe we go out a layer, and that could be maybe your volunteers or your advisory committee. And then maybe go one layer out, and that might be something like major gift donors or even monthly donors. And the idea here is that you would go to your core and work your way out and ask for warm introductions. The thing I think in fundraising that nonprofits experience, or they wish would happen, is that a donor would turn into a donor quick. And sometimes that can happen, but more often than not, it takes time. And what I found, the fastest way to chop that timeline in half is through a warm introduction, especially with our female donors. We really love a good recommendation. We really lean on credibility. And so if a friend shares about a nonprofit or tells us about a cause we might be interested in, that's going to go across way differently than if the nonprofit just reaches out cold, right? The mistake I see nonprofits making a lot when they go to, for example, their board of directors or their volunteers and say, hey, who do you know that wants to be a new donor, is they ask exactly like that. And that, frankly, is too much work for a board member or a volunteer to file through in their mental Rolodex. What I wish I would see nonprofits ask is more specificity. So let's say you're a dog rescue and you're looking for your next 10 donors. You might ask your board of directors, do you know anyone else that has a rescue dog? Do you know anyone else that loves their rescue dog as much as you love yours? Do you know anyone else that, is passionate about saving horses, cats, whatever? When you get specific, it allows the donor to file through their head and think, oh yeah, my neighbor is obsessed with their dog Fido and would love to know more about what we do here or whatever. And so I think if you're going to use the inside out method, it's really, really, really important to provide examples of these specific questions that you want them to ask, rather than, do you know anyone who would be a good donor for us? It's just not, you'll probably find radio silence if you ask that way.
Yeah, that reminds me of some bad fundraising advice I heard from someone at the beginning of my career in the nonprofit sector, who was like, yeah, just look at a list of like the richest people in town and just start going down that list. And it's like, well, capacity is not everything, because, first of all, the people who are the richest, they're getting hit up all the time by a ton of different causes, and they probably already know which ones they're passionate about. But if you go after people who are already passionate about your mission, that's one fewer step in the donor acquisition process, because then you don't have to convince them to care about your mission. They just already are right there.
Totally. Absolutely. I totally agree.
Great advice. So what's the third way to get new donors?
Yes. So the third new way to get new donors, I call making the first move. And if you're listening to this, you might want to get a pen and paper, because there's some steps. So we all have this at our nonprofits, some people that we've been lurking on or watching that we just know would be the right fit. And I'm not necessarily talking about that billionaire or that celebrity, but maybe you are an organization that's fighting for criminal justice reform, and you know that there's some really hard lawyers working to solve this big problem, right? And they would just, when they knew about your organization and what you're doing, it would be a match made in heaven, right? But you have no connection to them. You have no warm introduction. What do? I call this making the first move. How you do it though is very specific. So what I want you to do is find this person or these people, maybe pick 5 or 10 to start. And I want you to go consume a piece of content that they've been involved in. Maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's an alumni newsletter, maybe it's a news article or a blog post. And I want you to consume it from start to finish, the entire thing all the way through. Then what I want you to do, and this part is specific, I want you to find them on either maybe LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, and I want you to send them a direct message. Please, please, please lean on your skill sets in terms of gratitude and flattery. I don't care what people say, they go a long way. But more specifically, I think you should reference what you got out of that piece of content. It might say something like, "Dear Maria, I heard you on the so-and-so podcast. And when you were talking about A, B, and C, it really resonated me because my work over at insert nonprofit name, that was really helpful for us. And, thank you so much. And lots of love, lots of gratitude, etc." In my experience, this type of note has a 100% response rate. 100%. I don't know what else you can do that's more or less cold outreach with that kind of response rate. And usually they'll say something back like, "That was so kind. Thank you so much. Can you tell me more about this organization?" Something like that. And then that's your in to then say, "Let's set up a coffee meeting," or "Let's do a Zoom call," or "Let's follow up with each other," or "I'm following you now," or any of those things. And it now sets the stage for the very beginning of a relationship that's built on something authentic, something real that you can then build upon.
I love what you didn't just say, which is you didn't say in that first message to go ahead and make your ask. I love that you're talking about building a relationship, starting by complimenting something and genuine, like in a genuine way.
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? And you know, everyone can smell that type of what your underlying motive is a mile away when you do it like that. And when you kind of come in with as like, what's the word, like in a servant way, like, it just is a totally different vibe than immediately being put off. And you might think, well, we need money yesterday, like we need money fast, I need donations now. And I think that there's other methods to go through if that is your quest. Specifically, go to current donors and ask them to upgrade. um, but to just come out of the woodworks blazing is not going to, if anything, it's just going to be a waste of time and a negative. You're not going to be able to build that relationship at all. It will kind of be you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Totally. Yeah. And I think too, like maybe you one of your goals with this person is to get them to become a donor, but in order to be genuine, I think you need to look at the full picture of how this person can fit into not just your organization but your cause in general. And so truly building a partnership with this person, especially if they are a notable thought leader versus just going and trying to get like a few bucks. So
I agree.
yeah, great advice. Okay, so what's our fourth way to attract new donors?
Yes. So I call this step planting seeds. And it's an adaptation of this book by a guy named Douglas Ritter, who has what's called the 20 seed game. Have you heard of it?
I have not, but I, as you know, love reading. So I'm definitely putting that on my list.
Yes, yes, you should. He basically breaks down how you can set up what I call listening meetings. And it goes back to identifying 20 people. In the nonprofit space, I like that to be more like 25 or 30 people to start, just because it's just a little bit different than the business world. But you pick your 25 or 30 people that you want to start building a relationship with, the down the road intention of them becoming donors. And he has a very specific formula for how you identify folks and reach out to folks, which again is with this very servant leadership mindset. It's a very specific meeting. You're asking for 30 minutes. You're not asking for the world. You're asking to just chat. You're not asking for a donation. If it's an in-person meeting, you go to their office or you have a neutral meeting space. You're not asking them to come to your nonprofit. You're making it easy as possible for them. And then majority of the meeting is spent listening. It's you asking them questions about them, their work, their family, their interests, their lack of interest. And then maybe the last 5 minutes or 5 to 10 minutes is them probably in a polite way being like, well, tell me about you. And that gives you the opportunity to say what you do at your nonprofit. And then at the end, you ask a question around how you can be helpful to them. And I know nonprofits think that they don't bring a lot to the table, but you do. I can't tell you how many times my natural skill set is connecting. And I don't care if you're a billionaire or you have $1 in your bank account, everyone likes and needs connections. It could be to a babysitter. It could be to your next mechanic. It could be to the person who helped you plan a really fun vacation, or it could be your next business relationship, right? Like we all have valuable things to offer. And then you need to follow up, right? You need to send a thank you message. And the reason this is called planting seeds, because there's that saying, right? Like the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. And so this is about seeding those relationships where they've just now had this very wonderful first in-person meeting with you where you know so much about them. So you have so much material on how to follow up with them and steward them and cultivate them down the road. You've also set a really nice tone. So the next time you have maybe a lunch and learn, or you have some sort of opportunity that they might be interested in, it's a super easy follow-up. But most importantly, it also gives them a minute to know a teeny tiny bit about you. And again, that goes into their mental file. And the next time they hear about someone that might have something to do with what your nonprofit does, a little trigger will go off and they'll remember this really nice person that came and had this really great meeting with them and who was so thoughtful in their follow-up. And it will just, again, set the right tone for a really meaningful and authentic relationship.
Yeah, I love that. I also, so something that you said is that the last part of the conversation, even if you don't transition into talking about yourself, to be polite, they'll probably say, you know, well, tell me about you, tell me about what you do. In the same way, when you ask them, how can I support you? They will probably reciprocate and say, well, how can I support you? And I'm not saying that that's the time for a hard ask, but you definitely should be prepared to say how they can support you because that will happen.
It will, for sure. And again, even if you don't ask for money, you can ask for connections. You can say, do you know anyone who, again, going back to those examples I gave before around specificity, do you know anyone that has a dog that was rescued that might be interested in our work? Do you know anyone who loves to cook from fresh produce? Like whatever, they might just say yes. And then you can take that ball and do the same type of meeting with that person.
Because also it's awkward if it's like, no, I don't know anyone who loves dogs.
Yeah. And if that's the case, then you say, okay, cool. Like, you know what I mean? It's okay to move on. And
Sure.
it's okay for them not to give you anything in this meeting. That's not what the meeting's about at all.
Yeah, I love that. And then what's our fifth and final way to find new donors?
Yes. So for our fifth and final way, I called it building a dream 100 list. And what that looks like is thinking about where your donors are hanging out. I mean, virtually, I mean, in the online world, but I mean, physically as well, right? So and then it's about how do you get in front of those audiences? So let's use my former client Tender. Tender is an organization. I'm obsessed with them. And their founder, Jacina, is one of the great nonprofit leaders of our time. She runs an organization called Tender, which is based in Atlanta, that helps bridge the financial gap for single moms. And they do that through covering rent for a month, paying for groceries, diaper and wipe deliveries, etc. They are very specifically in like the family mother space, right? And their vibe, their brand is very cool and fresh and like it's just it's very like hip. I don't know how else to describe it. Like and the founder Jacina, she's young, she's like either a millennial or Gen Z. I don't know. If she's a millennial, she's on the very, very young side of it. And so that vibe resonates, right? And so where are the people that are following Tender, which is different than organizations maybe that have been around for 50 years that do similar work, right? They're just not the same audience. Where are they hanging out? So Jacina's audience is probably on Instagram, not Facebook. So can she, for example, find some of these mom influencers on Instagram with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of followers, and go live and talk about what it's like to be single moms or whatever? Are there brands that you could partner with that have guest blogs? For example, something like The Honest Company. They run blogs. They have blog posts multiple times a week. Can you do a guest post? Pinterest. There's podcasts. What podcasts are young new moms tuning into? It's less about actually joining the nonprofit podcast, because then the audience, who might have some young moms on it, but they're there for information on how to run and grow and scale nonprofits. This is different. This is going to the audience that's trying to learn about or get inspired by other moms and how they're doing it and how they're making it work and how they're navigating paid family leave or lack thereof, or paying bills, or having 3 kids under 4, and just all this stuff. And so it's like, know your audience and go to your audience. And then again, I don't know about you, but reverse engineering that kind of model I said about making the first move, people will do that to you, right? People will come to you and say, hey, I heard you on, or I just watched that live. And so then you take that nugget and then you turn that into either a plant the seed meeting, or you make the first move and you kind of re-engineer it that way.
Yes, I love that. All of these tips really seem like they complement each other well. And so I love that we talked about that, but I know we're running out of time, Jess, but before we go, I want to make sure we also talk about what you said at the very beginning, that the most efficient way to increase your fundraising dollars is not to find new donors. Like if you're looking for money fast, that is not the way to go, because all of these strategies you're describing, like you said, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And you don't want to push too hard at the beginning. So what is the most effective way to increase your fundraising dollars quickly?
Quickly, I would say, is to go to your current donors and ask them for more money. Ask them for an upgrade. Maybe you ask a donor who's been giving $1,000 a year to become a monthly donor at $100 a month, and now they're giving $1,200. Maybe you ask a major gift donor who's donating $5,000 a year to now become, make that annually for the next 3 years, so you're not spending all your time renegotiating the ask, things like that. That is the fastest way to go. But I also realize that some organizations listening to us have 53 people on their email list. And I also know that retention rates are really, really, really tough in the nonprofit space. And so you're also going to need a mix, right? You're going to need a mix of the new, and then you're going to need a mix of nurturing and growing your current base. And I think the combination of both is what will make you successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jess has all kinds of really awesome tips. If you check out her website at Out in the Boons. Jess, how can nonprofit leaders find out more about your work?
Yes. So my favorite place to hang out is Instagram. And I would love you to send me a DM. In fact, if you DM me Jenni, Jenni, I will send you a free resource. One of the things that I've found nonprofits do is they throw spaghetti at the wall when it comes to finding new donors. And I have a new donor calculator to help you figure out exactly how many new donors you need in a calendar year to meet your budget based on your retention rates and your annual gift amount. And I would love to send that. So DM me Jenni and we can chat over on Instagram.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for your time today, Jess. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.